There was a legend in the small town of Black Hollow, a story parents told their children to keep them indoors at night. They called it the Carnival of Shadows. According to the tale, it appeared without warning, always on the outskirts of town, just beyond the woods. No one ever saw it arrive, and no one ever saw it leave. But those who ventured inside never came back the same or didn't return at all. Emma Parker had heard the story countless times growing up. Her grandmother used to whisper it to her during stormy nights, warning her to stay away from the woods. Emma always dismissed it as an old wives' tale, something to scare children into behaving. But now, as an adult, she didn't believe in ghost stories. Life had taught her that real horrors were far more mundane. It was late October when the rumors started again. Several townsfolk claimed to have seen strange lights flickering in the woods at night. Others spoke of eerie music, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees. Emma overheard these conversations at the diner where she worked. Most people dismissed them as pranks or imagination, but a few older residents exchanged nervous glances, muttering about the Carnival of Shadows. Emma didn't think much of it until she noticed her younger brother, Jake, acting strangely. Jake was 17 and usually glued to his video games, but lately he'd been spending a lot of time outside, especially after dark. When Emma asked him about it, he brushed her off, saying he just needed some fresh air. "You can do the next in your sister." But there was something off about the way he avoided her gaze. One night, Emma decided to follow him. She waited until he slipped out the back door and trailed him at a distance. The air was crisp, and the full moon cast a pale glow over the town. Jake walked quickly, heading toward the woods. Emma's heart raced as she followed him, her footsteps muffled by the soft ground. She didn't know what she expected to find, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she reached the edge of the woods, she heard it. Faint music like the tinkling of an old carousel. It was strange and haunting, carrying on the wind. Emma froze, her pulse quickening. Jake disappeared into the trees, and for a moment she hesitated. Then she forced herself to move forward, determined to bring him back. The deeper she went, the louder the music grew. It was accompanied by faint laughter and the occasional creak of machinery. The woods, normally silent at night, seemed alive with sound. Emma's unease grew with every step, but she couldn't turn back. She had to find Jake. After what felt like an eternity, the trees gave way to a clearing. Emma stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. There it was, the Carnival of Shadows. Bright lights flickered against the dark sky, illuminating a sprawling carnival ground. There were tents of every color, their fabric shimmering like liquid under the moonlight. Riders spun and whirled, their metal frames groaning with movement. A Ferris wheel towered over the clearing, its lights blinking in an uneven rhythm. Wow! And everywhere there were shadows, figures moving among the attractions, their shapes indistinct and unnatural. Emma's instinct was to run, but then she spotted Jake. He was standing near the entrance, staring at the carnival with wide eyes. Before she could call out to him, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold. "No, you... Jake!" Emma hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't seem to hear her. She hesitated for only a moment before following him. As soon as she stepped into the carnival, the air changed. It felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her chest. The music was louder now, almost deafening, and the laughter seemed to echo from every direction. The lights were blinding, casting sharp shadows that danced and shifted unnaturally. Emma tried to keep her eyes on Jake, but the carnival seemed to twist around her. Pathways appeared and disappeared, and the attractions seemed to move on their own. She called out his name, but her voice was swallowed by the noise. Panic set in as she realized she was lost. Every direction looked the same, and the shadows seemed to be watching her. She stumbled through the maze of tents and rides, her heart pounding. The air grew colder, and the laughter took on a sinister tone. Finally she saw him. Jake was standing in front of a large tent with black and red stripes. He looked over his shoulder, his face pale and his eyes glassy. Then he disappeared inside. "Jake!" Emma shouted, running after him. She pushed through the tent's heavy curtains and found herself in near darkness. The only light came from a single spotlight in the center of the tent, illuminating a wooden stage. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside the tent. The air was thick and cold, and the silence was deafening compared to the chaotic noise outside. The spotlight flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe along the edges of the tent. "Jake!" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer. She strained her ears, listening for any sound, any sign of her brother. But all she could hear was the faint creak of the wooden stage, as if something or someone was moving just beyond the light. Emma stepped closer to the stage, her footsteps muffled by the soft dirt beneath her. The spotlight dimmed for a moment, and then, with a sudden burst of energy, it brightened. Standing in the center of the stage was a figure man, tall and thin, dressed in a tattered ringmaster's coat. His face was pale, almost corpse-like, and his eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and dripping with malice. To the Carnival of Shadows." Emma took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run, but before she could move, the ringmaster raised a hand, and the tent seemed to close in around her. The entrance disappeared, replaced by walls of dark, shifting fabric. "Where's my brother?" she demanded, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. The ringmaster tilted his head, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Ah, yes, the boy. He's quite the curious one, isn't he? Drawn to the lights, the music, the promises of wonder." He took a step forward, his boots clicking against the stage, just like so many others before him. Emma clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand her ground. "Let him go," she said. "Marnuis, we don't want anything to do with this place." The ringmaster chuckled, a low, unsettling sound that echoed through the tent. "Oh, my dear, it's not that simple. You see, once someone enters the Carnival of Shadows, they can't simply walk away. The carnival decides who stays and who leaves." Emma's heart raced as the ringmaster gestured toward the far end of the stage. Another spotlight flickered to life, illuminating a row of cages. Inside each cage was a persona, what was left of them. Their eyes were hollow, their faces pale and gaunt. They clung to the bars, their fingers thin and bony, as if they had been drained of life itself. Each of them thought they could escape. The ringmaster said, his tone mocking, "But the carnival always claims its prizes." Emma's stomach turned as she recognized one of the faces in the cages. It was Mrs. Harlow, an elderly woman who had gone missing from town years ago. Her once lively eyes were now dull, and her frail hands gripped the bars tightly. "This isn't real," Emma whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," the ringmaster said, his voice growing darker. "And now, it's your turn to play." Before Emma could react, the ground beneath her shifted. She stumbled, falling to her knees as the tent transformed around her. The stage disappeared, replaced by a maze of mirrors and flickering lights. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly, reflecting her panicked expression back at her from every angle. "Find your way out if you can," the ringmaster's voice echoed, distorted and cruel. "But be warned. The shadows are watching." Emma scrambled to her feet, her pulse pounding in her ears. The mirrors distorted her reflection, twisting her image into grotesque shapes. She turned a corner and nearly ran into another reflection of herself. Only this one smiled when she didn't. She screamed and ran in the opposite direction, her breathing shallow and frantic. The maze seemed to stretch on forever, each twist and turn leading her deeper into the carnival's grasp. Shadows darted in the corners of her vision, and faint whispers followed her every move. "Yake!" she called out, her voice cracking. "Where are you?" The only response was the sound of laughter, high-pitched and chilling. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emma turned another corner and froze. In front of her was another cage, smaller than the ones on the stage. Inside was Jake, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He clung to the bars, his lips trembling as he tried to speak. "Emma," he whispered, "help me." She rushed to the cage, grabbing the bars and pulling with all her strength. But they wouldn't budge. The metal was cold and unyielding, as if it was part of the carnival itself. "I'm going to get you out of here," she said, her voice firm, despite the tears streaming down her face. "I promise." But before she could do anything else, the shadows around her began to move. They slithered across the ground, forming long, spindly arms that reached for her. Emma backed away, her heart pounding. "Run," Jake said, his voice barely audible. "They're coming." Emma didn't want to leave Jake, but the shadows were closing in fast. Their inky forms twisted and stretched, their long fingers clawing at the ground as they moved toward her. She had no choice. "I'll come back for you, Jake. I swear," she cried, before turning and running deeper into the maze. Her footsteps echoed against the cold floor, and the mirrors around her reflected not just her own terrified face, but the shifting shadows that followed close behind. Every path she took seemed to twist and loop back on itself, but she couldn't stop moving. Stopping meant being caught. The laughter returned, louder now, and it sounded like it was coming from all directions. Emma's mind raced, trying to figure out how to escape. "It's just a maze," she whispered to herself. "There has to be an exit. There's always an exit." But this maze was no ordinary construction. It felt alive. The mirrors flickered like old TV screens, showing images that didn't belong. One showed her standing still, though she was clearly running. Another showed Jake, screaming as shadows wrapped around him. She closed her eyes, trying to block it out, but the sounds and the flickering light seemed to seep into her mind. The path suddenly widened, and she found herself in a circular room. In the center was a carousel, its paint faded and peeling. It turned slowly, the music grinding out a warped, haunting melody. Around its base, strange figures sat, slumped in the seats, lifeless and silent. Emma hesitated, stepping closer to get a better look. Soon down, as the carousel creaked around, she saw that the figures weren't just mannequins. They were people. Their eyes were closed, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and sorrow. Their bodies were stiff and grey, like they had been drained of life. Emma's stomach turned as she recognized one of them. It was Mr. Grayson, the hardware store owner who had gone missing last year. She stumbled back, covering her mouth to stifle a scream. The air felt heavier now, like the very carnival was feeding off her fear. The lights dimmed, and the shadows around her began to shift again, creeping closer. "You're wasting time." The ringmaster's voice echoed through the room. "Every second you hesitate, the carnival takes more from him. Can you hear him calling for you?" Emma froze, straining to hear. Over the grinding music, she thought she heard Jake's voice, faint and desperate. "Emma," he cried, "help me." Her fear turned to anger. "What do you want from us?" she screamed into the air. The ringmaster's laughter echoed in response. "Entertainment, my dear. That's all we've ever wanted. The carnival thrives on stories, on fear, on the lives of those who wander too far from the safety of their homes. And you, Emma, are a perfect addition to our collection." Emma clenched her fists, her panic fading into determination. "You won't take him. You won't take either of us." The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. Then the ringmaster's voice grew colder. "Brave words. Let's see if you can live up to them." The shadows surged forward, and Emma turned, running back into the maze. The mirrors seemed to shift and warp more violently now, and the floor beneath her felt unstable, like it might give way at any moment. Her heart pounded as she pushed forward, refusing to give up. She spotted a faint light ahead and sprinted toward it, her lungs burning. As she got closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a tall, ornate mirror framed in gold. Unlike the others, this one wasn't distorted. It showed her reflection clearly, but something about it felt wrong. The mirror pulsed with energy, and Emma hesitated. The shadows behind her grew louder, their whispers turning into guttural growls. She had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and touched the glass. The moment her fingers made contact, the world shifted. The ground fell away, and she felt herself being pulled through the mirror, like she was falling through water. Colors and shapes blurred around her, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Then, with a jolt, she landed on solid ground. She gasped for air, blinking against the sudden brightness. She was outside, standing on the edge of the woods. The carnival was gone. The clearing where it had stood was empty, as if it had never been there at all. "Jake!" she called out, spinning around. Her voice echoed in the stillness. "Jake!" There was no answer. Emma's chest tightened as she realized he wasn't there. She had escaped, but he hadn't. The carnival had taken him. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The woods were silent, the only sound her ragged breathing. But as she sat there, something caught her eye. In the dirt near her feet was a small object, a piece of paper. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was an old ticket, faded and torn. Written across the top were the words, "Admit one, Carnival of Shadows." Emma stared at the ticket in her hand, her mind racing. The paper felt cold, as if it had been pulled from the depths of winter. "Andeshi," written beneath the words, "Admit one," was a chilling message. One remassed, one remains. The show must go on. Her grip tightened and she felt a surge of determination rise within her. This wasn't over. She couldn't leave Jake behind, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. The carnival may have disappeared, but she could feel its presence lingering in the air. The faint smell of burning wood and popcorn still clung to the breeze. She looked back at the woods. The carnival had vanished, but she knew it wasn't gone for good. It had to exist somewhere, waiting for its next victim. Emma refused to let it win. She wouldn't let it claim her brother as just another name in its twisted collection. That night, she returned home, her mind buzzing with questions. She spent hours online, researching anything she could about strange carnivals and local disappearances. The stories were fragmented, scattered across forums and obscure websites. People spoke in hushed tones about a carnival that appeared without warning, always at the edge of town. It would lure people in with its bright lights and promises of wonder, only to trap them in its dark web. The most unsettling part was that no one seemed to have clear answers. Survivors, if they could even be called, that spoke in riddles or refused to talk about what they'd seen. Some claimed the carnival only appeared to those it chose. Others said it could be summoned, but the price was steep. Emma found a name that kept appearing in her search results. The Ringmaster. He was described as the heart of the carnival, the one who controlled its every move. Some stories painted him as a demon, others as a vengeful spirit. But one thing was clear: he thrived on fear and despair, and he would do anything to keep the carnival alive. Emma's eyes burned as she scrolled through endless pages of information. The clock read 3:47 a.m., but she couldn't stop. She came across a post on an old message board that made her pause. It was titled, "How to Find the Carnival of Shadows." The post was short, written by someone with the username LostSoul777. It read, "The carnival doesn't just show up, it chooses you. But if you're desperate enough, you can summon it. Find a crossroads at midnight. Bring an offering, something of value to you, something irreplaceable. Light a candle and speak these words. I seek the shadows. Let me in, but be warned once you step inside. There's no guarantee you'll leave." Emma read the post 3 times, her heart pounding. It sounded insane, but everything about the carnival defied logic. She had no other leads, no other options. If there was even the slightest chance it could bring her back to Jake, she had to try. The next night, Emma packed a small bag with essentials: a flashlight, a pocket knife, and the ticket she'd found in the woods. She also brought the most irreplaceable thing she owned, an old bracelet Jake had made for her when they were kids. It was simple, made of frayed thread and plastic beads, but it was one of her most treasured possessions. As the clock neared midnight, she made her way to the old crossroads on the outskirts of town. The air was heavy, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Emma stood in the center of the crossroads, her hands trembling as she placed the bracelet on the dirt. She lit a small candle, its flame flickering in the cool night breeze. "I know you." Taking a deep breath, she whispered the words, "I seek the shadows. Let me in for a moment." Nothing happened. The silence was deafening, and Emma's heart sank. Had she been foolish to believe in the post? But then, The wind shifted. It grew colder, and the shadows around her seemed to deepen. "Oh, it's say mistakes of decay." The flame of the candle flickered wildly before snuffing out entirely. The darkness closed in, and Emma felt the ground beneath her tremble. A faint light appeared in the distance, accompanied by the haunting sound of a calliope. The music was slow and warped, but unmistakable. Emma's pulse quickened as the light grew brighter, revealing the outline of a large tattered tent. The Carnival of Shadows had returned. On this she gripped the ticket tightly and stepped forward, her legs shaking, but her resolve steady. The entrance to the tent loomed ahead, its fabric rippling as if alive. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the flap aside and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of burnt sugar and decay. The dim lights flickered overhead, casting unsettling shadows along the walls. The carnival was eerily quiet, as if it was waiting for her. Welcome back. The ringmaster's voice echoed, smooth and mocking. He stepped out from the shadows, his pale face illuminated by the flickering lights. "I knew you'd return. They always do. I'm here for Jake," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The ringmaster smirked. "Of course you are. But the carnival doesn't give without taking. Now, are you prepared to play the game, Emma? Are you prepared to pay the price?" She didn't hesitate. "I'll do whatever it takes." The ringmaster's grin widened, and the shadows around him seemed to grow darker. "Very well, then. Then, let the games begin." The ringmaster clapped his hands, and the carnival came to life around her. The dim lights brightened, casting an eerie glow on the twisted attractions. The distorted calliope music swelled, echoing through the tent, and Emma could hear faint whispers from every corner. It was as if the carnival itself was watching her, waiting for her to fail. "Here's how it works," the ringmaster said, his voice dripping with amusement. "The carnival loves a good challenge. To find Jake, you must complete 3 trials. Each trial will test you, your courage, your resolve, your will to survive. If you succeed, you and your brother may leave, but if you fail..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the shadows curling around him told her everything she needed to know. Emma tightened her grip on the ticket. "What are the trials?" she asked, her voice steady. The ringmaster gestured to the carnival around them. "Oh, you'll see. The first one begins now." The ground beneath Emma's feet shifted, and she stumbled as the world around her twisted. The colorful lights and carnival sounds faded, replaced by darkness and the faint sound of dripping water. When the world settled, she found herself standing in what looked like an old, abandoned funhouse. The air was damp and cold, and the walls were covered in graffiti and peeling paint. The mirrors that lined the corridor were cracked and smeared with grime. Emma took a cautious step forward, her heart pounding. Trial 1, the ringmaster's voice echoed, though he was nowhere to be seen. "Find the key to escape the funhouse, but beware something else is searching for you." Emma's stomach churned. She didn't ask what something else meant. She didn't want to know. She had to keep moving. I'm stealth, said down, washed to. She walked deeper into the funhouse, her footsteps echoing against the damp floor. No, I don't to. Always it and trusty, sir. The mirrors distorted her reflection, making her appear stretched and twisted. At one point, she saw a reflection of herself smiling back, even though her own face was frozen in fear. She quickly turned away, her pulse racing. The corridors seemed endless, twisting and looping back on themselves. Each turn brought her to another warped hallway, another eerie reflection. The sound of dripping water grew louder, and Emma realized it wasn't water at a lit, was the sound of something wet and heavy moving in the darkness. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting around for any sign of a key. She passed through a room filled with hanging chains, their clinking sound echoing ominously. As she stepped through, she felt a cold, slimy hand brush against her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. "Keep moving?" she whispered to herself, swallowing her fear. Sounding her then you shouldn't chill. Saw. Finally, she spotted something glinting in the corner of a room. A small rusted key lay on the floor, illuminated by a faint light. Emma sprinted toward it, but as her fingers closed around the metal, a low growl echoed behind her. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. In the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes stared back at her. The creature was massive, its twisted form hunched and shrouded in shadow. Its claws scraped against the floor as it moved closer, its growl turning into a guttural snarl. Emma didn't think she ran. She clutched the key tightly and sprinted back the way she came, the creature's footsteps thundering behind her. The corridors twisted and shifted as she ran, making it impossible to tell if she was going the right way. The growling grew louder, and she could feel the creature's breath on her neck. She rounded a corner and spotted a door at the end of the hallway. It was old and rotted, but it had a lock. Emma fumbled with the key, her hands shaking. The creature was almost upon her, its claws scraping against the walls. With a desperate cry, she jammed the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, and she threw herself through, slamming it shut behind her. The growling stopped, and the funhouse fell silent. She leaned against the door, gasping for breath. The key dissolved in her hand, turning to ash. The ringmaster's voice returned, smooth and taunting. "Well done, Emma. You survived the first trial. But don't get too comfortable. The next one won't be so easy." The world shifted again, and Emma found herself standing in a new area of the carnival. This time, it was a massive Ferris wheel, its rusted carriages swaying in the wind. The sky above was dark and starless, and the air was filled with an oppressive sense of dread. "Trial 2, the ringmaster announced. "Climb to the top and retrieve the lanterns. But be careful, each step you take will bring you closer to the truth. I'm out, and the truth is far more terrifying than you can imagine." Emma looked up at the towering Ferris wheel, her heart sinking. The carriages groaned and creaked as they moved, and the structure didn't look stable. But she had no choice. Jake was still out, and she couldn't stop now. Taking a deep breath, she approached the Ferris wheel and began to climb. Emma gripped the cold, rusted metal of the Ferris wheel. As she began her climb, the structure swayed under her weight, groaning like a dying beast. Each step sent vibrations through the frame, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it might collapse at any moment. The wind howled around her, sharp and biting. Ursaneand. Her fingers ached as she climbed higher, but she kept her focus on the faint glow of the lantern at the top. It flickered weakly, its light barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. As she ascended, the ringmaster's voice returned, echoing from the shadows below. Do you feel it, Emma? The truth is waiting for you. It's been waiting for a long time. She didn't respond. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how terrified she was. She ran Tom Talland, Millie at his distances as he halfway up the wheel. The air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. She felt a strange vibration in the metal, as if the Ferris wheel was alive, breathing beneath her touch. When she glanced down, she froze. The ground wasn't there anymore. Instead, a swirling void stretched beneath her, its inky depths pulsing like a heartbeat. Faces appeared in the void-twisted, anguished faces that screamed silently. As they reached for her, she forced herself to look away and kept climbing. Nodance, you're almost there, the ringmaster purred, his voice impossibly close to her ear. She felt his cold breath on her neck, but when she turned, there was no one there. Finally, she reached the top. The lantern hung from a fragile-looking hook, its light flickering in the wind. And so, Nimistrais, Emma reached out, her hands trembling, and grabbed it. The moment her fingers touched the lantern, the Ferris wheel jolted violently. The entire structure shuddered, and Emma lost her footing. She clung to the metal with one hand, the lantern in the other. As the wheel began to turn, it moved faster and faster, spinning wildly, as if trying to throw her off. The wind roared in her ears, and the void below seemed to rise, reaching for her with its clawed shadows. Hold on, Emma, she told herself, her voice barely audible over the chaos. With a final burst of strength, she threw herself onto a nearby carriage, clutching the lantern to her chest. The Ferris wheel groaned and shuddered before coming to an abrupt stop. Out. The void below disappeared, replaced by solid ground. Emma climbed down as quickly as she could, her legs shaking with every step. When she reached the bottom, the ringmaster was waiting for her, his pale face split into a wide grin. Well done, he said, clapping slowly. You've survived 2 trials, but the third is where the real fun begins. Emma glared at him, clutching the lantern tightly. Where is Jake? She demanded. The ringmaster tilted his head, his grin widening. Patience, my dear, all will be revealed soon. Follow me. He turned and walked into the shadows, and Emma had no choice but to follow. The lantern's light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the path ahead. They emerged in a clearing, at the heart of the carnival. A massive tent loomed before them, its tattered fabric swaying in an invisible wind. The ringmaster gestured for her to enter. Inside, the air was thick and stifling. The tent was filled with mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of Emma. In some, she looked older, her face lined with sorrow. In others she was younger, carefree and smiling. At the center of the tent stood Jake. He was slumped in a chair, his face pale and his eyes closed. Jake! Emma cried, rushing toward him. So new day. But as she reached out, the mirrors around her shattered, and the ringmaster's laughter filled the air. Jake's figure dissolved into smoke, and Emma was left alone in the empty tent. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? The ringmaster's voice echoed. Emma spun around, her heart pounding. Where is he? What have you done to him? The ringmaster stepped out of the shadows, his grin gone, his eyes burned with an unnatural light. He's here, Emma. But to free him, you must make a choice. A table appeared between them, and on it were two objects: the bracelet Jake had made for her as a child, and the lantern she had retrieved from the Ferris wheel. The bracelet represents your bond with Jake, the ringmaster said. Your love for him, your memories together. The lantern represents your light, your soul. If you choose the bracelet, you can free Jake, but you will take his place in the carnival. If you choose the lantern, you can leave, but Jake will remain here forever. Emma stared at the objects, her mind racing. She couldn't leave Jake behind, but the thought of being trapped in the carnival forever filled her with dread. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for the bracelet. I won't abandon him, she said, her voice trembling. Take me instead. The ringmaster's grin returned, and the tent dissolved around her. The carnival roared to life, its lights blazing and music swelling. As the world shifted, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. She had saved Jake. That was all that mattered. When Jake woke up, he was lying in the woods where the carnival had been. The ticket was still in his hand, but the carnival was gone. He called out for Emma, but she was nowhere to be found. Years later, Jake would tell the story of the Carnival of Shadows, warning others to stay away. But deep down, he knew the truth. The carnival always comes back, and somewhere within its twisted halls, Emma was still there, waiting, watching, and keeping the shadows at bay.